I've seen a lot of guys who are new to night vision asking if their IR device is going to hold zero on their handguard. Most of the time, I'm not exactly sure what they mean. Is the IR device itself going to hold zero under recoil? Yes, if it's a reasonably high quality device like a Steiner D-ball or a Maul or a PEC or even the Holosun units, the device itself is going to hold zero no problem. If the mount on the IR device is properly tensioned and properly installed, then that's going to hold zero just fine as well. So I assume that when people ask this question, what they really want to know is if something on their handguard is going to cause a problem. If the device is mounted to a metal 1913 Picatinny rail machined into the handguard, i.e. the full-length top rail on a lot of handguards, or the side rails if you're part of quad rail gang, then yes, that interface is going to be fine. You definitely don't want to mount your IR device to a rail section that is attached via either M-lock or key mod. Bolt-on rail sections like the ones on an old Geisley SMR should be a lot more solid, and for all intents and purposes, we'll just consider those to be machined in. So there are still two possibilities to consider when someone asks if their laser device is going to hold zero. Number one is, will the rail itself flex, causing a deflection if you load up the rail? If you put a lot of weight on the end of a free float handguard, for example, if you're shooting from a bipod and you're loading up the bipod really strongly, or if you're shooting from a barricade and you're really leaning into it, that can cause shift of the handguard. And the amount of shift will depend on the rigidity of the handguard, and the rigidity of the handguard will depend upon the material, the thickness, and the length of the handguard. So if you take two rails of comparable material, comparable thickness from the same manufacturer, a 16-inch rail is going to deflect a lot more significantly than a 10-inch rail because of the properties of leverage or something. It's not important. How do you make a handguard rail more resistant to flex? You basically have to make it more rigid by adding more material. For example, Midwest Industries has a new Night Fighter rail design that is supposed to be significantly more rigid than their earlier combat rails. If you look at them side by side, you can see that there's a significant increase in weight on the Night Fighter rail, and that's because they've added a shitload of material at the back end around the barrel nut. How important this handguard rigidity is probably depends on how likely you are to be taking long-range, precise shots from a supported position under heavy load. You also have to keep in mind that the precision of your laser and the fidelity of your night vision device are probably much bigger impediments to long-range accurate shooting than the flex of your handguard. The other possibility that people are referring to when they talk about holding zero is shift of the rail over time. To me, this is a much more realistic concern because a lot of AR handguards will slowly loosen up over time and start to shift slightly or rotate a little bit. Even ones with anti-rotation tabs, those tabs will keep the rail from rotating enough to make the gun inoperable or unsafe, but not so little that they won't still cost you a zero of any device that's on the rail or front sight. This potential problem is exacerbated because almost all AR handguards on the market are of fundamentally the same friction fit design. You slide them over the barrel nut, and then you clamp the bottom or the top of the rail together so that it squeezes onto the barrel nut and gives you a friction fit. So in terms of long-term stability, the Midwest Industries Night Fighter rail is not going to be significantly more resistant to shift than any of their other rails, including the ultralight ones. I'm showing you this on a Midwest Industries SLH rail, but all the Midwest rails use the same design, and almost every other handguard on the market uses a variation of this same design. The barrel nut is installed and tightened properly, the handguard is slid over it. The cross bolts on the handguard squeeze the handguard together across a slit so that it clamps down with friction onto the barrel nut. There's also a little metal tab thing that keeps it from sliding too far forwards or backwards. The reason why rails are designed like this is because it makes them way easier to install. These friction fit handguards require no timing of the barrel nut whatsoever. You crank it down to torque specs and then you can immediately install the handguard without having to worry about messing with shims or trying to get anything timed up. This is one of the reasons why I really liked the ALG defense rails. On the ALG rails, you do have to properly time the barrel nut so that the gas tube can fit through a slot. Each rail came with a pack of shims so that you could properly tighten it down and properly time the barrel nut with the gas tube. The upshot being that once the barrel nut is properly installed and timed, the handguard bolts directly to the barrel nut. It's not friction, it's actually bolts threaded into the barrel nut. Yes, it is much more annoying to install, however, you take advantage of all of the torque on the barrel nut. Nothing will cause this handguard to shift unless it's able to overcome the huge amount of torque that you're able to put into a barrel nut. The torque spec window for an AR barrel nut is enormous. It's like between 30 and 80 foot-pounds. Most of these handguards still have an anti-rotation system, so if something causes the handguard to transmit enough force into the barrel nut that it actually loosens, it will still not be able to turn far enough to make the gun unsafe or inoperable. So should you worry about this? First of all, probably not. If you're dragging your guns around and shooting them enough that handguard shift concerns you, you should just be periodically rechecking your zeros anyway. And if your gun stays in the safe most of the time, nothing's going to make the handguard move, shift, or otherwise migrate. If you're still worried about it and you still want to do something about it, you can look into different handguard options. I am personally significantly more concerned with shift than I am with flex. I don't expect to take long-range, precise shots under night vision while loading the shit out of my handguards. I'm confident in the ability of the ALG rails on a couple of my ARs to resist shift. ALG discontinued their rails for whatever reason, and before they did, they redesigned them to make the M-LOK slots totally useless. ALG rails are also fairly heavy as far as M-LOK rails go relative to their length. You could just go for a monolithic upper if you really want to solve this problem once and for all. Or you could go with the Arrow Enhanced system. That uses a proprietary style of barrel nut that's actually just a machined-in piece of the upper receiver. You slap the barrel in, you torque a collar down over it, and then the handguard bolts directly to this fixed barrel nut. So the handguard on the Arrow Enhanced system is pretty much unable to shift unless the entire upper breaks. They're also really easy to assemble, which makes them a good choice for somebody building their first AR. The major downside being that they're kind of chunky. They weigh a fair amount, and they also have a very thick feel in the hand, which some people are into. No judgment there. And the standard LaRue handguards also look impossibly bomb-proof. Anyway, let me know what you think. I'm pretty sure most of this stuff is completely overblown. You can spend a lot of money and add a lot of weight to your AR to slightly mitigate a problem that's not much of a problem in the first place. Alright, see you later.